Hello, and welcome to this episode of Goffstown's Grizzled Grizzlies. Tonight, we'll be talking about public education in New Hampshire and in Goffstown and different aspects of it. I'm Mike McKinnon.
And I'm Eric Emmerling. It may be kind of difficult to locate a Goffstown resident with more of an inside look at how our towns and schools function than Scott Gross, our guest tonight. He served and chaired on both the Goffstown School and Select Boards. He's also served as a trustee of the trust funds, been a member of a budget committee, and was past president of the Lions Club. And for the past dozen years or so, he's been one of the golden athletic voices of Goffstown television. And Scott worked in the insurance industry for nearly 30 years before becoming our Goffstown School Business Administrator in 2018. In 2025, he took over as the Superintendent's Operation Manager. And from our own Grizzled Grizzlies perspective, Scott, I think, is able to articulate the pros and the cons of complex issues in an impartial manner. And for that reason, we thought the time was right to have Scott on our show to talk about a couple topics. One is the Educator Freedom Account, which provides eligible families with grants, private school tuition, tutoring online programs, educational funds, that kind of thing. And two, the Open Enrollment concept, which, if it happens, would allow New Hampshire students to attend really any public school in the state and take their community tax dollars with them to pay for their learning. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Eric.
I'll start with the first question. There was a time when public funds couldn't go to private schools. Back when my children were kids, and now they're middle-aged, they attended private schools, and we never thought that we could or should take tax money to help pay for our tuition. Nowadays, it seems that this is an option, and public money can go to private schools. I'm kind of wondering, where does one draw the line now between the right of a parent to choose what's best for their children versus that person's commitment to the responsibility to the community?
Scott, recently at a deliberative session, there was somebody that got up and spoke and talked about the state constitution. From your knowledge, what does the state constitution say about this matter?
Well, first of all, you mentioned education freedom accounts and the changes. It's been a while since I was on the school board. I think it's over 20 years. A lot has changed in public education, so. Not just in New Hampshire, but nationwide. And certainly school choice has kind of been the mantra for the last 10, 15 years, both in New Hampshire and across the United States. But referencing back to what you mentioned before about the New Hampshire Constitution, I actually never read it until most recently. So it was only until after that deliberative session, I got to read this thing. Did I know that there were 3 or 4 New Hampshire Supreme Court cases on education funding that referenced the state constitution? Yes, but I never read it. So I did, and I read it, and I was surprised in a way, because in plain English, it basically says that no public tax dollars should be used for any religious schools or sects. So I was kind of taken aback by that, because it was implemented, I think, via an amendment to the state constitution in the 1800s, but it seemed to contradict, to me, kind of what's going on right now in New Hampshire. So again, to me, it was just interesting. I never read it, and when I read that, I'm like, seems odd.
Mm. In New Hampshire, basically 70% of all public education funding in New Hampshire comes from our good old property taxes, while only 30% comes from the state and federal governments. For wealthier communities, I guess, with strong tax base and high property values, their taxes may be challenging but manageable. But for property poor districts that are already stretched thin, this can mean that the state's needs can go unmet. Basic Supreme Court rulings dating back into the 90s have found that the state is not, or they've ruled that the state is not adequately funding public schools. And rather than digging deeper into their pockets to find some more money to provide adequate funding, both the House and the Senate have proposed bills that they're trying to redefine what adequate education means. These bills seem to be a legislative attempt to evade school funding. And I'm wondering what are your thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, my thoughts are my thoughts. They
Of
don't
course.
represent, the
Anybody.
school district or anybody else. But I think that this is an issue that New Hampshire has been grappling with for 3 to 4 decades at least. As I'm getting older, I'm more and more concerned with the property tax burden, maybe because soon I will be retired or on a fixed income, et cetera, but it just doesn't seem, I would hope that whether you're on the left side or on the right side politically, that we could all agree that the current path is unsustainable. Funding education largely through local property taxes is just something that I think is getting more and more and more challenging. And sadly, I think it's pitting neighbor versus neighbor. And not only in this community, but across so many communities in New Hampshire who do not have the commercial tax base, to support education. And that's where it bothers me the most, because I happen to have friends who are on both sides of the political spectrum. And this should not be something that divides us. I think we should be supportive of education. And whether you're someone who is extremely pro-education or you believe fervently in school choice, I personally believe that both systems can exist if they're funded adequately. And I think that's where the dispute lies. So it shouldn't be about, adversarial in a way. It should be, how do we solve this problem where there is a degree of school choice and there is robust support for public education at the same time. So I'm an optimist in that regard.
I think what's really getting us to nitpick and argue with one another is that we can't discuss or argue or try and find other revenue sources. So instead, it seems like we're just trying to nitpick and cut budgets so we can keep our costs low.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that's always up for a debate. And, and I think if we're going to, make inroads here, I do think that we're going to have to ultimately look at different options because this current path is not sustainable. And you look at the funding over the last 3 decades, like right now in Goffstown, I worked in the financial area, so I'm a little bit of a spreadsheet geek, so I plotted all of my tax bills out over a 29, 30-year period, and, the data is there. I mean, so for me, 91% of the school-related tax dollars are local property tax, and 9% is from that statewide property tax. And when that statewide property tax was implemented around the year 2000, so we're talking 26 years ago, it was 60-40 was the split. So we went from 60% being local tax, 40% being that statewide property tax, to now 91 and 9. That's what the numbers are, and that's the scary part for me. Something's got to give.
Well, New Hampshire public school lawsuits have been going on for
Decades, yeah.
And since Claremont won, with decisions being made, and numerous ones since that time, and yet there's no actual application or implementation of what the decisions have been. It seems like, well, I guess I'm more interested, how does this impact Goffstown, if at all? It seems like it's more of a discussion on semantics as what is the definition, as you already said, of adequacy.
It's funny that you bring this up because, to me, if I was to put, what do they say, the elephant or the gorilla in the room?
Yep.
That elephant or gorilla is it time for New Hampshire to have either an income or a sales tax? That is the ultimate question, right? It would be different revenue streams. there's one side of the argument that says, well, that was done in other states like Connecticut. It was supposed to be a limited percentage and it went out of control due to out of control spending. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that relying upon one revenue stream, such as property taxes, places an undue burden, especially those who are on the tail end of their careers or income earning capacity, or those on a fixed income. So they are then forced to either downsize or work into their 70s or 80s to pay for these rising local property taxes. And then there's the other part of it that says, hey, if we can get spending under control, then we can kind of curb those tax increases. So all those arguments are out there. But Mike, when you reference Goffstown, I am familiar with our cost per pupil, and it is the lowest cost per pupil K through 12 school district in the state of New Hampshire. So I do think that even with a limited commercial tax base, which it's only about 9 or 10% in Goffstown, and with one of the lowest, the lowest K through 12 cost per pupil, we are managing those expenses. But our taxes are still high in Goffstown simply because we don't have the benefits of a Bedford or a Hooksett that has a massive, retail or commercial base that supports, the public infrastructure. So it puts a lot of pressure. But, getting to your question, about adequacy, I think that's something that is evolving. So most recently, the Department of Education, the legislature took a look at the rules, those ed rules. I think they're the 306 rules, which talk about what is required, for education. And for the most part, there were some changes on the periphery, but the core of reading, writing, literacy, all those things are there. The challenge is how do you deliver it in an ever-changing world? Mm-hmm. So technology is a great example of that. Technology costs a lot of money, and we want our students to be technologically proficient in the world that we live in. But with that, there's an increased cost, which, by the way, we didn't have 30 years ago. We had a little bit of it, but not nearly where it is now, where that IT infrastructure is costing millions.
Right. Well, I was around when New Hampshire instituted the first national state lottery. And one of the big selling points at that time of the lottery was a mechanism to help fund education.
Yeah.
Do you know what percentage or how much of the lottery actually goes to education?
I know a little bit, but not a lot. So I'm not an expert. I mean, obviously, I pass that sign on Route 293, and when I see the Powerball and Mass Millions, I think it is, and I'm like, man, I would be a really good steward of that money.
That's what I keep saying.
Right? I think I would be good. But it's my understanding that it's about 5% of the total cost, right around there, is what the lottery brings into the Education Trust Fund. I think from what I know, it's fairly robust. I mean, it brought in like over $200 million, I think, in the last year. So that's record breaking. But the costs are kind of going up. But it's a misnomer for people to think that, it pays for half. It's I think it's 5-6% of the total educational.
That number rings a bell to me.
Yeah, it's not huge.
And they have a huge administrative cost over there. That it's not a big profit margin.
Yeah, that I don't know, but I know it's a smaller amount. It's mostly, as you mentioned before, education is supported by local property taxes predominantly here in New Hampshire.
I wonder what the is included in the definition of state adequacy and which state funding mechanisms are applied to it.
Well, in terms of, adequacy, again, it's those educational rules that dictate like what courses or what competencies are required, for students in New Hampshire. That's driven by educational rules. So you've got your laws, your regulations, and then your rules, and those are largely dictated at like the Department of Education level. And there have been changes. I don't think anything that's been like horribly earth-shattering in my opinion. But that being the case, when you talk about adequacy and the costs, it hasn't, the amount that the state of New Hampshire has given local communities, again, not just Goffstown, all local communities, it's gone up around 1% a year over the last 10, 20 years from when I did some research on this about a year or so ago. On the other hand, the cost of the budgets in Goffstown and in other communities is between 3.5%. So what you see, Mike, is that gap. So you've got the state is increasing adequacy at a rate of about a 1% year over year, but the actual budgets are going up 3.5% a year over year. And then that gap, that compounding effect is what is putting more and more pressure on that local property tax bill. So that's really the dilemma. So the only way, I just said the only way, I mean, you either have to come up with another revenue source to get it to the 3 or 3.5% to kind of keep it, or others would argue, hey, you got to lower your expenses of your local school districts. So that's why you're seeing efforts made to say, hey, do we need as many SAUs? You have what about the numbers of staff that we have, administrators? So you're hearing, all of those arguments, and in some cases they are legitimate. I used to live in New York, and then I'm right on the New Jersey border. And in New Jersey, they've got a borough every 2 miles. I don't know if you ever so there's a lot of layers of government and school districts. You then on the polar opposite side of that, Mike, you've got Florida, where education is by a county, right? Well, you've got 1 million, students in one school system. So somewhere in between, there's probably a happy medium there. But yeah, I think we can do better in that regard. And one of the things that, I often say is that I really wish that the state would fund things that every single school district uses. I'm going to use an example. I was the business administrator. We use financial software that, costs a lot of money. There are different financial software packages used by so many school districts. There must be 10 of them that are out there. If the state just paid for one uniform financial software, right, and they paid for that, all of the data would already be in that system, and they could run their own reports till their hearts were content. But now they create a 38-page spreadsheet, and you got to populate the numbers. It takes a week to do some of these reports. So, to me, just offer one financial software package, one student information system, and pay for it. Take that burden off the local municipalities and school districts. But we don't do that because it's local control.
But we're either, here, like you say, down south, the counties have huge powers, or a lot more different than
And
here.
Purchasing is another one.
Yeah.
So where it's
They don't have central
everybody's on
purchasing
their
here.
own to
Right.
purchase. So
You're on your own for everything here.
Yep.
Which is why every district has.
curriculum is all done for the most part. So you have your state educational standards, but then each school district then tailors the curriculum, and there's not a whole lot of difference. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuances to it.
Yeah. Like what you said earlier about the cost breakdown with schools is we're significantly lower than all the other averages. In 2024, I think Mountain View Middle School had they were in
lowest.
third place, and
Yeah.
the high school was in second place, second lowest, and elementary and kindergarten was the first. And I think we're working so hard to keep the costs low here, but then we open up this idea of open enrollment. I don't know how that would help Goffstown.
So that one is a tough one.
Yeah.
And it's something that open enrollment has been on the books in terms of a law in New
Forever.
Hampshire.
Forever.
I don't
long
know about
time.
forever, but it's existed. There's only one or two school districts who kind of take advantage of it, and they're in the North Country.
Because of
But-
limited, they can trade
yeah.
off on labs.
But open enrollment and the iterations of open enrollment that are currently in legislation, they create a lot of, I call it, open-ended questions. Eric, you and I go back in terms of sports, and Mike, you too. And I know you guys are big sports guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
I consider open enrollment kind of like the transfer portal, okay? Now, I love sports. I love college sports, But in my opinion, the transfer portal is killing college sports, right? And open enrollment, if it's not done right, could really have some significant unintended consequences. From my opinion, again, I do not represent the views of any board or district. This is just me speaking now. And I say that because I strongly believe in competition and the free market. I do. And I do think that students and parents should have choices. I do, on a level playing field. I am concerned, just like I am with the transfer portal, like if we truly have open enrollment, what about those unintended consequences? You know, are we gonna have students transferring to another high school because they have the best soccer program? Are we gonna have students transferring to another high school because they have the best music program?
Right.
And maybe those are good things. I don't know if they're good or bad, okay? But those are the potential, you know, that exists. The one thing that is really not addressed is, you know, how do we deal with like special education and mandatory services when all of this shakes out? What do we do when we don't know how many students really are coming and going? Because with open enrollment, there's no deadlines, you know? You can kind of do it. So there's a lot of things that have to get worked out. So I'm not here to say that I think it's like the worst idea in the world. I'm just saying that it just needs a lot of thought and vetting.
Yeah.
And in my opinion only, I think it's going way too fast. So I'm someone who believes in change and trying stuff. So I'm not going to poo-poo it, but I just think it needs more deliberate study and more input from all stakeholders. So not ruling it out, but that's just me.
No.
Sounds like the issue is not open enrollments, but it's in the details.
Yes, but isn't that always the case,
It
right?
is,
So
it
there's a
is.
lot of like good and noble ideas that are out there. I've had them, right? But then all of a sudden, as you start to go through the details, you're like, ooh, I didn't think about that. I mean, that happens to me. Like I'm a big change agent type of person, and unless you get a lot of people involved, and even when you think you're right, you know, even 6 months later, you're like, oop, that happened.
Right.
You know, like, and then you got to fix it. You know, so but the difference here is that I don't think we want to have oops, we got to fix it when we're talking about the education of like K through 12 students. I think we got to be well-intentioned. That's all.
Right.
Yeah. More deliberate.
You mentioned before educational freedom accounts, the EFAs.
Yeah.
What are they? Are they like a voucher, or are there any limitations?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on them. I've had to, you know, obviously keep up with education freedom accounts. So they started several years ago, and the premise of an education freedom account is to give parents and students a choice of where they're going to school. And I think that, you know, in my opinion, the public school system may not serve the needs of every single kid. And I know that just from experience. I know that from friends and families who have gone to private schools or who have taken advantage. I know people who have homeschooled and have had a wonderful experience. So I'm not one to, I believe that everybody should have, you know, a degree of choice, but again, it should be a level playing field. So when we talk about education freedom accounts right now, folks have an opportunity. Right now it's capped at 10,000 participants. So the legislature took off the income requirements. So before there were certain income requirements, and if your family income was higher than a certain threshold, you didn't qualify. And with that, now there are no longer any income requirements, but there is a $10,000 threshold, and I believe next year it's going up to $12,500. So if you're looking at participation as a metric, and you'll hear this from many people, wildly successful program because families and students are taking advantage of it. But I personally don't know all of those other things. So educational outcomes are also an important component of a program's success. And right now, the latest that I heard was that I think it was like 45% of students who participate in these programs take a standardized test. The rest is more like portfolios, et cetera. So those 40 or 45%, we can compare their standardized test scores to those of homeschoolers or you can do that, but you have all these others that don't participate in that. So when you're trying to look at those metrics, Mike,
Right.
they don't always exist. The other part of it is I came from the financial side of education, and you're getting your audits done, and they're spending like weeks on end looking at every purchase order, and they're doing all these things. And right now, it's spotty, in terms of how that auditing is. So again, personally, I'm for school choice and for these options. I just believe that it should just be let's compare apples to apples, and let's have the same metrics so that we really truly can say that this is a program that is working, and maybe it is. The one thing that I have heard, and I think we need to study it more, is what impact, like a community like Goffstown. We have pressures at our elementary schools, in particular Maple. What impact does an EFA program have on not having to expand that school? So there could be positives that come out of all this stuff, but it just requires, again, more deliberation, more study, more similar ways of measuring it. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm a financial guy, so for me, it's all about, I want to look at the numbers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I certainly don't think public schools is fit for everybody.
Right.
I mean, we send our children to private schools for a number of reasons. But the problem I kind of have with the idea, when they eliminate, I think it's 300% or 400% of your of the poverty line.
Okay.
If you're over that, that's the limit.
Right.
Which is, I think it was like $90,000 for a family of four. It's
Yeah,
like,
I don't know it was between 90 and 100, I think. Let's call it that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that there are some people where that need may not be necessary. It's kind of they want it. It's their freedom, I guess, to get the money. But then what happens if you take that money out of our account, out of the Goffstown account, and people on a fixed income with me? I mean, I'm just seeing that as money leaving the school district.
You could look at it that way, right?
So if there's, I think the problem might be that you can't allow everybody to do it, but there's got to be some kind of a flow, I would think.
The argument is that some people argue that, hey, I'm paying into the whole property tax system, I'm not taking advantage of it, and by the state giving $4,300 to help support my education, my kids' education that costs $15,000, that's a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And we're saving the public school system, et cetera. So those are the arguments on the other side of it. And then there's the other one where it's a constitutional argument. It's like, can you do it? Now, if it's a non-religious school, then I think clearly the Constitution says go for it. But when it, unfortunately, the Constitution in New Hampshire does prohibit taxpayer dollars from going to religious schools. So, but it says nothing about if you want to homeschool, fine. You want to send to a private school that's not religious in nature, fine. So I think to me it's more of a legal question in that regard.
Yeah, and we have a kind of a lack of transparency too about how the effectiveness,
the
effectiveness of the EFA money going to wherever it's going.
I mean, they're subject to audits. But not nearly to the level that say public
school would have to go through.
Yeah,
Sure.
and I think a lot of folks don't understand, and it's not just financial audits. Public schools have obligations to we've got to worry about lead in the water. We've got to worry about asbestos. We've got to worry about we're everything. So whether it be facilities, which I just mentioned, all the programs that we have, teachers have to be certified. So there's a ton of regulation and oversight that is required of public schools, and that level of scrutiny is not nearly as much in say the private education world. So that's where I think people who are pro public education are like, wait, this seems like it's an unfair playing field.
Well, we talk about choice.
Yeah.
We've addressed that a little bit. Do we have any numbers of people who have taken advantage of it versus people who are already in a private school sector? In other words, people that were already, kids were not in public school and now How much has that changed? Do we know?
We have a little bit of data there, Mike, but not a ton. It literally requires you to like go one by one by one. The last time that I personally looked at it, it was under 50% of all EFAs they never went into our school system at all, ever. So, but that was prior to it being totally open when the income limitations came off. So when the income limitations, came off, that number has to be reevaluated. So I do not know that off the top of my head, but prior to that, I would say that around half, never attended any of the public schools.
Do homeschool, well, first of all, I think the majority, I'll just throw 95% of the people who homeschool have a legitimate, great plan for their kids. Do they still qualify for EFAs?
Yeah.
And is there any accountability? Now, again, I'm going to show a extreme example, but is it possible for, say, a family with 5 school-age children to homeschool and not do anything and collect the money? I mean, is there any transparency to that?
Technically, no, because there is a law that states that of what homeschool students or parents, guardians, have to comply with. So there is an expectation of academic performance, et cetera. What it states, though, is that it can be measured in 3 or 4 different ways. One of which, as I mentioned earlier, like if you can take a standardized test. Mm-hmm. One of them is also it's more competency based, meaning that if you develop a portfolio of your work, et cetera, and if it's evaluated by a non-public school teacher, I think, don't quote me on it, I think it's RSA 193 something. All right, I don't memorize RSAs, but I know 194 and 193. I think it's 193, and one of those, the law basically says that it could be a portfolio that is approved and evaluated by a teacher in a non-public school, as long as there's a consultation with the parent. So critics of this will argue, well, wait a second, like that doesn't seem robust enough. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But the challenge with that is, there's certainly, you can't argue if a homeschool student or anybody going to any school that's taking like the SAT in high school and you're comparing, like everyone knows the SAT. But when it's a portfolio and it's any teacher, not even in the same discipline as the subject matter, that's where sometimes people get like, that doesn't seem right. So it is possible, Mike, for, I guess, a kid taking chemistry to have, a teacher in, another country approve it. I mean, that would comply with the statute, right or wrong. So that is a possibility. But the law is what the law is right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk about the state funding, the SWEP program. Who pays it to whom?
Oh, so I've had to explain this like 100 times.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's. I'm just going to come out and say it. Like it's kind of like a shell game, all right? And I say that because it's supposed to represent the state's obligation to fund education, locally. But it's not money that ever gets sent to the state. It never resides in a state bank account, and money never goes to the state and then gets sent to the school districts or towns. It does not work like that. It is money that's raised locally, retained locally, and then used to offset the tax obligation. So no money changes hands. So it shows up on your tax bill, but it's retained locally by the town. And then it just goes to reduced. So if, let's say we had a $40 million tax burden and $4 million of swept, now your tax burden is 36. locally.
So is this considered state aid?
It's considered the state's obligation to assist in funding education, presumably, again, my opinion only, to comply with all of these 3 decades worth of lawsuits. So there are some who say that even with this recent court ruling where adequacy, a judge ruled that adequacy should be in the neighborhood of like $77 to $7,500. I don't know the exact amount. And right now it's around $4,300. Some are arguing that like, oh, just raise that through that statewide property tax and we'll call it a day. Like, and that would technically, Mike, that would meet the state's obligation.
That would be very popular.
Well, it would just shift where the line of the tax bill.
Yeah,
It's still paid and by local, again, I don't know about you, but I pay one check. I don't separate it out, county, local school, swept. I just write one. We all write one.
I looked down
or
the
the
bottom.
bank writes one on our behalf. And so it's, I don't know, like it is what it is. It's,
Right.
yeah.
I understand the state is no longer funding, I think it was about $250,000 for the Manchester School of Technology.
Yeah.
And that came before our school district after the funds had been
Yeah.
paid.
Oh, yeah.
The state said, that's your responsibility.
Yeah.
How does a district adjust for that? I mean, when you get it after you've spent the funds, it doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I think this is another tough one, right? So the way that state funding for, say, vocational education, it is part of the budget, the state's biennial budget. So they have to budget 2 years in advance. And they budgeted a certain amount of money. So let's just hypothetically say that it was $10 million for vocational education for over a 2-year period. So $10 million one year, $10 million the next year. What happened is that all across the state, and you kind of knew this was going to happen eventually, more and more kids are enrolling in these CTEs, these technical centers, okay?
Sure.
The state has actually did a really good job funding these technical centers like Manchester School of Technology. They're all over the state. So more and more kids are participating in these programs, from cosmetology to electrical to you name it, plumbing. Unfortunately, the budget was already set. And again, when we look at those modest increases, so it was already set. Now more and more kids are going. So the costs are there, but the reimbursement that's it. You're only getting that $10,000. So unfortunately, for Goffstown and so many other communities, they're having to, they have 2 choices. They can either reduce the number of kids eligible to go to a Manchester School of Technology, or they can find a way to cover that shortfall. And it's all in arrears, Mike. So it's like it already happened last year. Then you're dealing with the year after. So that's again part of the unpredictability of school and school finances is that you think you're good, and then all of a sudden you're $250,000 shy. And right now, and I always hope and pray that there are things that we can agree on, right? I hope we can all agree on that we need more tradespeople, okay? And that, college may not be the right choice for every single kid, and that, so hopefully there's universal agreement that the MHTs of the world and trade schools are a really, really good thing, but we're just not funding them to where they need to be. So hopefully, again, I'm trying to be an optimist here. I hope that our state reps and senators and governor and whoever are the powers that be are like, hey, we really got to boost, these career technical centers and give more funding, because we desperately need tradespeople all across the board. So it is a shortfall this year, and I'm trying to be optimistic that future legislatures are going to deal with this one.
That's sad. I mean, a few years ago, I was a pair at Goffstown High for a while, and I would take one of 3 school buses that we'd fill up that would
Yep.
go to Manchester School of Technology, and it was amazing what they do over there.
Oh, it's yeah,
Oh,
and it's not just them. It's they're all over the state. Concord has a fantastic one. Alvern. I mean, they're all over. Dover.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, all over.
And
the
they even
state.
do recruitment.
Yeah.
For jobs out of high school.
Wonderful program,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's helping our kids tremendously.
Let's talk about unfunded mandates. First of all, it seems like there are an increase. I counted that in 2022, there were 9 unfunded school mandates, and in 2023, there were 12, and 9 more in 2024.
Wow, you did a lot of research.
And that's 30. How does a school system adapt for the implementation and the cost of these unfunded mandates?
Yeah, so I think we need to take a step back here. So I hear this term a lot, and a lot of the people who might be watching don't even know what that means. So New Hampshire Constitution, again, and I read it this time, Mike, because I did not, Eric, I swear to God, I never read this thing.
You read aloud to
And
me
there are,
at the deliberative.
yeah,
You
so
pulled out
there
your
are
pocket.
there's parts in the New Hampshire Constitution that says that you cannot create laws in which you don't pay for, okay? That's what it says in there. So that's the term unfunded mandate. But the reality of it is that it's really it's forced taxation upon local taxpayers. That's really, so you can call it unfunded mandate. I could call it forced taxation on local taxpayers. But what that means is that when the legislature, the state government passes a law that compels a local school district or a municipality or an agency to do something, they technically can't do that unless they pay for it. So that is a big challenge. So if they mandate a particular program, they have to pay for it, and there are quite a few. I didn't do the extent of research that you did, but it is a challenge for us. So. And then the biggest one it's not so much, we oftentimes talk about the state of New Hampshire and the woes of that, but let's talk about the federal government, right? So the federal government back in the 70s with IDEA, these are children with disabilities, said that, okay, we will fund 40% of all special ed costs. We're not even remotely close to that. And those requirements are more and more and more. So when you have a student who has special needs that require services that we can't provide here in Goffstown, and we have to send that kid to a specialized school, that could cost $150,000, $200,000 with transportation to take them to that school. Now, the state has programs as well, but so the federal government is not contributing their share, and then the state is not contributing their promised share, and then all of that is also unfunded. So then the local taxpayer has to foot that bill. That's a big challenge.
I would think another challenge is communicating all this information that you've expressed today to the taxpayer, to the community. It's not easy and not simple.
Well, you are correct in saying that it's not easy and it's not simple. I think we live in a world now, especially now, right, where it only takes 15 seconds, on a Facebook reel or TikTok video, whatever you want to call it, to challenge something or maybe make an accusation. But because we're dealing with really complicated things that could take literally 10 minutes to explain, most people aren't going to tune in for 10 minutes to hear the lengthy explanation on something. So you're up against that level of attention span, and people just don't want that.
And there's no, like you said, no centralized source of impartial, objective information that you could learn from it.
Well,
If
I would
wanna go to
disagree.
Google,
I personally think that the information that the school and the town here in Goffstown
sure.
and
I'm
the
one of
state
the
for
three.
that matter, I
I'm
think
one of
that-
the 330 people that 300
but I
people
do
go to
think
meetings,
that,
but if you're not going to the deliberative session,
I
you're
wanna-
not reading that.
I do want to make a plug here
Yeah.
because the state of New Hampshire, and there's a lot of people who are on different parts of the political spectrum, I get all that. But the state, over the last 4 or 5 years, has done, on the education side, there is so much really, really good data and statistics. I'm a numbers guy, like on the state's website. So I would encourage, folks, look up data and reports on the New Hampshire Department of Education. You're going to see crazy, like everything that we have to do administratively to report to the state, it's all there. So if people have questions, not only, hopefully the answer should be locally on our website in terms of financials, but so many of these metrics, Mike and Eric, that they're there, but just people simply don't know about it. So really, really, and a way to compare us to the state, compare us to different communities, maybe similarly sized, so a lot of really, really good. Have you looked at any of this stuff?
Not to
I'll
the
have to
extent
give you a tour
have.
on the website.
Not the extent that you have, but again, I think our point is that there's so many people don't see that.
Yeah, maybe. But it's there, and I think I have to give credit to the folks at the state, over the last like 5 years who really have, implemented those all of that data.
Okay.
I like the numbers, so like.
Let's go back to open enrollment.
Yeah.
You already alluded to certain things in it. With the way the laws are now, or maybe of things coming down the road, how can that financially impact Goffstown, negatively and or positively?
It could do both. And I think that if you look at it, you have to look at it from both perspectives. I believe we have a darn good school system here, and we could attract surrounding communities or students to come here. So you have that. But you could also have the unintended consequence of students leaving for a variety of reasons. So again, with that level of competition amongst public schools, you could see schools specializing and then students kind of picking and choosing where they want to go. I see it, honestly, I think I see it more at the high school level, and just how I'm kind of envisioning it, where
like
you could have a high
regionalized.
school of performing arts and a school that, and I think we've always had that, to a certain degree. I mean, certain private schools have kind of geared themselves to that, but now this could be a public school thing. So, but I'm nervous about it, me personally. I'm nervous about it, again, going back to that transfer portal thing, like, what do we become? Do we have a school that really wants a super strong basketball or football program, and they hire a coach that they pay a ton to, and then they get all this stuff, and then how are they paying for that? Are they paying it through through advertising or endorsements? And like, where does it all come? Where does it go? And I think, and I know I'm overusing this example, but like, when you look at like how, say, college sports and universities have kind of dealt with this level of competition, some saying that it's really have a devastating impact on them, of the haves and the have-nots. So I don't know. I'm kind of always worried about those unintended consequences of things. So I'm getting a little older, and I just, maybe I want to take it a little slower. And that's coming from a change agent person, but this one I'm
I
more
agree with
cautious
you.
on.
I wouldn't want to see the all 5 members of the all-state basketball team at one school, where there's no chance. The competition disappears. But I guess the high school it might be okay to create those regional things. Would be a good idea. But you have to have that kind of that local community feel in your grade schools and maybe your middle schools.
I also think it makes it challenging for communities and schools to make investments. So when you're talking about, what is a school going to be known for, are you then going to make an investment because you're going to be a STEM, science STEM school, and you're going to invest millions of dollars into labs, right?
Right.
Or are you going to compete with the Manchester School of Technology and say, we are going to have the most robust plumbing program in the state of New Hampshire out of this school, and we are not only going to have a great plumbing program, but we're going to have 100% job placement coming out of that program. okay? And we're going to work with all local, contractors in southern New Hampshire. And we're going to be a pipeline for that. And they're going to help fund our school. I don't know where this goes.
Right.
I don't know where it goes.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, and I think that now, if the open enrollment works, we'll have all these localized schools trying to think out of the box and create some kind of concept.
Yeah.
And we won't have any statewide. So we won't, if we don't know what we want, what the end result is.
Yeah.
And we're starting with open enrollment and we don't know where we want it to go, where it's going to end up. How will we know that it's working? And I don't think we know that.
And it's interesting because here we are and we're talking, and what's our perspective right now? Our perspective is this little bubble of Goffstown, southern New Hampshire, right? The better question to say, what are the concerns of schools in the North Country or out in Keene? All right, because they're way more nervous than, so we're in a position where we could potentially attract, whether it be Ware, Manchester, Bedford, we could attract, right? Because we are kind of centrally located. But if you're in the North Country, your options are significantly reduced. So their concerns are way different, than ours. So again, this is going to be a tough one, I think, for leaders in New Hampshire to deal with. I just think it just needs to be taken slower, more deliberate. Have the public hearings. Do it in a manner that is more thoughtful.
Do you have any notion as to why we're in a hurry to hatch this egg now?
I do not know.
No.
I don't know.
I know they've had a couple of bills recently where they didn't even have public comment, and that distresses me to a point. I think it's imperative that people state how they feel before they make a decision.
Yeah, and I think on this one, I think that is a criticism, and again, my opinion only, a fair criticism of this particular process. I think this one needs to be way more deliberate. I have heard the word transparent like 100 bazillion times over the last, decade. And this one needs to be way more transparent. So with the people that are going to be the most impacted. And, the potential unintended consequence is loss of revenue or paying for students to go to another school and all of that unpredictability associated with it. So for me, I worked in the business office environment. So when I hear this, again, the unintended consequence that I think of is do we have the people right now to bill for, let's say, 100 or 200 kids coming in and out? And then, again, I'm thinking, are they going to bill on a per diem basis? Is it going to be every week, every month? Because there are going to be people who say, oh, well, it's per diem. And then, I'm going to have people arguing over how much money they owe. And what happens if they don't pay me on the 30 days that they're supposed to pay me? Then that's a cash flow problem. And and then all that unpredictability of revenue and so you're trying to estimate that. So those are all the things that, again, because of my prior job, I'm is this even being thought about? So we talk about administrative costs. Now you need an accounts receivable, department. Not so much accounts, because we mostly pay bills. We don't take in a whole lot of revenue individually.
Right.
But now you're going to need people who would have to send out invoices and make sure that the right amount came in, and then follow up when we don't get our money from potentially it could be 100 communities. Who knows? I don't know.
You were just talking about it. Can you simplify it? How much or what some of the challenges would be? Where Goffstown is a district that has the lowest student cost per pupil for K through 12.
Yeah.
And you have kids coming in from either, it has to be more expensive districts. How does that all work? And I think you were alluding to that when you were talking about the potential dynamics of that.
Well, right now, it really hasn't been 100% vetted. So there's been discussions about the school that is sending the student, say, to Goffstown would have to pay 80% of what Goffstown's cost per pupil is. But and then who makes up the difference? Is it supposed to be the student and the family? There's so much, Mike, that is unknown at this particular point. And again, unknowns lead to a lot of unfortunately unintended consequences that sometimes aren't great. But one thing I do feel pretty confident in saying is that it will have more increased administrative cost associated with it because you're dealing with more transactions for students. So, right now, even with Manchester School of Technology, we have a bill. We got to make sure that all these kids went. If they de-enrolled, we stop paying for. We have a tuition agreement with New Boston. We do the same exact thing. So if a kid comes in at a certain period of time, it's on a per diem basis. It takes a long time to work out those tuition numbers and what like New Boston owes us or what we owe Manchester School of Technology. This would just put that on steroids.
Yeah, it sounds like Goffstown has the potential, or any school district, for losing their autonomy.
Absolutely.
If this happens, the potential.
It's possible. Like from what I have probably read what you have read about it, and I just think it just needs a whole lot. It needs to slow down, and it may have good things associated with it, but we just have to study to make sure that we address, the things that may not be so good for all communities in New Hampshire, not just us.
And I'm guessing another potential concern would be with open enrollment is kids can enroll in September, but school districts do their budgets at least a year or 2 years in advance, and that could have implications.
Yeah, I think, the other tricky part, guys, is that yes, you are correct on the budgeting piece of it, but let's also talk about the smaller grades, right? Where you're talking about class sizes. So, you might have a district that has a certain policy where it says we don't want more than 24 kids in a fourth grade class, hypothetically. And now more kids come in. Do you have to hire another teacher literally at the last moment because you're now pushing it into 28 kids in a fourth grade classroom or something? So do I think that's an extreme example? Of course, I'm giving you an extreme example, but it's there. And I think that's the challenge, is that when it's a complete like free for all in a way or totally open, all of those things are possible. I gave you an extreme example, but the other thing is, which we don't know yet, is like kids with special needs. Their district is responsible for those costs, but to what extent? And there's so many unknown questions.
Do you know if our legislatures had any study committees on these issues?
I don't know.
Because that would be a concern to me. I echo your concerns about the speed in which things are going. And my kids are all graduated from school. Of course, my grandkids are in the school system now. And I grew up in a different generation, and I'm used to things within that bubble you were talking about. And I'm open to improvements or changes. But I guess my comment would be, let's slow down and get this right.
Okay.
Yeah, and the obvious thing to me too is that you're going to be like an airline. What are you trying to overbook, or how do you figure out a budget, or how do you know how many seats you have? And when you talk about
even right now, it's a challenge, and I'll give you a good example. Like we have all these housing developments, right? And we have a gentleman that has helped us out in trying to figure out, okay, if we have 100 units, let's say in the mill project, how many students can we, potentially project? And it's a crapshoot. So that is, to me, that's the biggest. So we're already dealing with that, and so far so good. But you just never know. Now you add this other layer of complexity onto it. It just makes it much more difficult.
I volunteer in a public school outside of Goffstown on a weekly basis, and a fourth grade, and enrollment issues crept up, and I think a teacher left or whatever, and the classroom that I volunteer in has 29 fourth graders.
Yeah.
And how do you, with an attention span of a fourth grader, the poor teacher has a really hard time controlling the classroom. I don't know how people
I
are
could see
learning
that
from
being a challenge for sure.
Yeah. So I just hope that they'll figure it out in time. But hopefully we won't have to deal with it in the next year or two. Yeah.
But to get your opinion, this is a broader subject. It's not something really
Will the
focus on
Celtics win the championship? I hope so.
with or without Jason Tatum.
They have a better chance with them.
But what is your opinion on? We hear comments about public education and people trying to destroy public education and et cetera. Comment on that from your perspective.
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yes, it is.
Do I, as somebody who has been around public education, I was a former school board member, as you mentioned, it's becoming increasingly, more challenging on a variety of fronts, okay? Most notably is like teachers and the supply and demand, the economics of that. So to give you a good example, it wasn't even 10, 15 years ago where if you had an opening for an elementary school teacher, you might get 100, 200 applications. Now, you're lucky if you get 15, maybe 20.
Really?
Yeah. And we're seeing a decline in teacher prep programs. So the changes of public education in New Hampshire all across the country, the increased scrutiny of education, again, whether it's right or wrong, has led to it being a less than desirable occupation for say those graduating college. So that is a major issue that I think all school districts are facing, and school districts are only as good as their educators, and with that is becoming a problem. The other thing is that there are more and more regulations and requirements from both the federal level and the state level in terms of like what they expect for reporting, et cetera. There are more and more requirements of the citizenry. So our parents they want more. They want to know. So now we have, a different reporting structures for grades. So as parents want to know in real time, how their students are doing. Whereas, probably when you and I went to school, you get that report card kind of at the end. Maybe you had a parent-teacher conference, but now it's kind of, with all of the systems in place. So the demands are much greater. The communication is much harder than it was. So and we're in a more polarized society, unfortunately. So all of those things together. I'm not going to characterize them as trying to drag public education down, but I'm just telling you that the forces that are out there, the economic forces of supply and demand for our staff, really super challenging. The costs of things they are not going down. They are getting more and more and more expensive, from transportation to books to technology. I was just talking to our IT director, and the memory cards are they're going up 500%. I don't know if you've read about this.
No.
So a laptop that might have cost us $800 might cost us $1,000 this summer because of the memory and the memory alone. So because they're competing with all this AI and all of that. So it's just, those are the types of pressures, and this is a business. I mean, I have this argument with educators, even with administrators, and they're like, oh, it's education, it's not a business. I'm like, it is a business. It has the supply and demand, all of those things, marketing, all of that. So yeah, that I think is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Now, the recruitment of teachers, I think that is a critical problem now,
Yes.
especially in districts that don't pay as much as some of the other ones, right?
Yeah, so that's one component of it. I do believe that salary and benefits compensation is a piece of it.
And fire and rescue people have the same problem. Police
They all
departments
do.
have the same problem.
And we are in a very, very tough geographic spot here in Goffstown, because we compete with the Bedfords, we compete with Manchester, we compete with Concord. So we're competing, and obviously we're competing with Ware and a few others, but because people within a 30 to 40 minute commuting distance, you can go all the way down to Nashua in that period of time. So yeah, it's difficult, and you hit it on the head. You know, when I was a select board member, same thing. I mean, we would be losing police officers and firefighters to Manchester like crazy. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's scary.
I have to admit, I have a sort of a utopian hope. And I would like to see us as a community find a way to discuss our issues in sort of maybe a round table-ish scenario with civility and respect. And
I think you're onto something. I do. And I will say that because I feel like I have good relationships with people who are on the different sides of the political spectrum, more of that is needed, you know? So I'm a big believer in constantly talking to people who think differently than you, or trying to connect two groups. But if we can do that, I think that would be a really, really good thing. So
we can all brainstorm.
well, I have ideas
I
on
have-
this,
I
and
have
maybe
one
it's
on
going
that,
to take like a year, but I was thinking about like a St. Patrick's Day roast or something.
Kind of like what they do in the Boston.
You got it. And you
Exactly.
bring everybody together,
Yeah.
you poke fun of everybody, you talk at the table, and you just, for one day,
Kind of.
you have a common,
Used to do that, the press association used to do that with the president too.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a guy named McKinnon who could be especially suited for this. As we're in a green backdrop studio.
Yeah.
just have hands in a head.
I love
showing.
corned beef.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. I was thinking somehow of having a town meeting. I mean, have some of our representatives give a State of the Union kind of address, in some kind of a forum where maybe questions are handed. It's somehow where you can create some decent debate and not it just being a political.
Yeah,
this and
that's
that.
tough nowadays. It
And
is.
to do it over breaking bread or something, I think is the
Because
way to do it.
I think it's tough because you have to have a degree of trust in one another, and that's difficult.
Yeah.
So right now, you know, we're in an environment locally, state, federal, where I don't know if we have that. I wish we did. But I hearken back to my days when I was in elected office, and there were plenty of people. We had a lot of wide spectrum of political leanings, but afterwards we were all joking around and we all got along super well.
Right.
Like, I don't know if that exists today. Maybe.
No, I
No,
don't.
like the
I
days
think
of
we were
Ronald
talking-
Reagan and Tip
Yeah.
O'Neill.
Yeah.
We were talking, well, 10, 15 years ago, and we were talking before. I didn't know the political party of half of the people that ran
Right.
the town and the school budgets and everything. I didn't know it because that didn't really matter that much.
But I think that's where we have to keep those thoughts in mind, where it should not matter. It really should matter if we're doing what we think is best for our community, then I think we'll be okay. I do. We'll have differences of opinion on things
Maybe
and
how
how to
you go
spend.
about
You always
doing it,
have that.
Yeah, sure,
But
you have to.
yeah, as long as it's not hyper like partisan, I think we'll be okay.
Maybe, yeah. We can't do it like Red Sox Yankees, but more strategical in some other way.
Okay.
So you said you came from New York.
Yeah.
Where are your leanings?
What? Fan-wise?
Yankees, Red Sox.
So it's so interesting that you say that. Like I am like, and hopefully this will not reach the New York area, but I am like abdicating like all New York allegiances. So I have become a Patriots fan. I've become a Red Sox fan, a Bruins. I mean, I have become like a Boston fan, and that's not to say that if Boston was not in any of these, like the playoffs or Super Bowl, whatever. Yeah, if New York was in it and Boston wasn't, yeah, I'd probably root for them. But no, I think and plus, like, you could be a front runner now because Boston has had like a 20-year run now of like just incredible success. What do they call it? Like Title Town, They just have so many
Yeah,
championships.
13, 14 titles in just this century,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, it's crazy like that.
Well, this has been fun.
Well, yeah, thank you for
It's a lot
having
of
me.
fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I really
for coming.
appreciate it. Yeah, it's been informative to me, helping me to kind of sort things through in my own head. So we do appreciate it. And so I guess this is another great edition of Goffstown Grizzled Grizzlies. Come back soon. Maybe a year from now we will have the St. Patrick's Day roast
Plans,
up here.
yes.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I'll start thinking of some good jokes about you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.